Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into the history of one of the most iconic superheroes of all time, Batman. We all know him as the Dark Knight, the Caped Crusader, the brooding protector of Gotham City. But what if I told you his grand debut was almost a complete disaster? That the character we know and love today was just a few bad decisions away from being a forgotten relic of the Golden Age. Stick around, because the story of Batman's first appearance is way more dramatic than you think. It all starts in 1939. A new publisher, soon to be known as DC Comics, was riding high on the unprecedented success of Superman. Created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the Man of Steel was a phenomenon, and every publisher wanted their own version. The editors at DC, particularly Vince Sullivan, were desperate for another hit. They turned to a young artist named Bob Kane, who had been doing some filler work for them. The directive was simple: create another superhero. Fast Kane, eager to seize the opportunity, went home and started sketching. His initial concept, however, was a far cry from the Batman we recognized. He envisioned a character named Batman who looked more like a pulp hero with stiff bat-like wings and a bright red costume. He even had blonde hair and a small domino mask, leaving most of his face exposed. It was generic, uninspired, and frankly, a little silly. Kane knew it wasn't quite right, but he was under pressure. This is where the story takes a crucial turn. Feeling stuck, Kane called a writer he knew from a studio, a shoe salesman with a flair for storytelling named Bill Finger. Finger came over, looked at Kane's drawings, and saw potential, but he also saw a lot of problems. And this is where Bill Finger, the unsung hero of Batman's creation, began to work his magic. Finger's first suggestion was to change the costume. The bright red, to cheerful. He suggested a more intimidating color scheme, gray and black. The stiff, hang glider-like wings, impractical. Finger proposed a scalloped cape that would flow and billow in the wind, creating a dramatic, bat-like silhouette. The flimsy domino mask, not nearly mysterious enough. Fingal suggested a cowl that covered the entire head, with pointed ears, leaving only the chin exposed. This would create an aura of fear and anonymity. He also added the iconic gauntlets. In just one conversation, Bill Finger transformed the visual identity of Batman from a brightly colored pulp hero into the dark, imposing figure we know today. But Finger's contributions didn't stop at the costume. He fleshed out the entire concept. Bob Kane had the name Batman, but Finger gave him an identity. He came up with the name Bruce Wayne, drawing inspiration from historical figures like Robert the Bruce, a Scottish patriot. He created the tragic backstory, the wealthy socialite whose parents were murdered in front of him as a child, instilling in him a lifelong vow to fight crime. This wasn't just a superhero. This was a character driven by trauma and a thirst for justice. Finger also established him as a master detective, a brilliant scientist, and a man at peak physical condition, not a superpowered alien, but a human who pushed himself to the absolute limit. With these massive improvements, Kane put together a 6-page story. The story, titled The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, was set to debut in Detective Comics number 27, but even here there was another near miss. The story itself was a bit of a rush job. In fact, if you read it today, you might notice some striking similarities to a pulp story by Theodore Tinsley featuring a character called The Shadow. It turns out, Finger heavily borrowed, or swiped, the plot from that story. The pressure to meet the deadline was immense, and originality took a backseat to just getting the comic finished. So, in May of 1939, Detective Comics number 27 hit the newsstands, and the cover, drawn by Bob Kane, featured Batman swinging on a rope against a yellow background. He looked cool, he looked dynamic, and kids were intrigued. They opened the issue, and despite the borrowed plot, they were introduced to this dark, mysterious new hero. He didn't have superpowers. He used his wits, his fists, and a few gadgets. He was a creature of the night, a stark contrast to the sunny, godlike Superman, and the public loved it. Batman was an instant success. He was different, he was darker, and he resonated with a world that was on the brink of World War II. The darkness in the character reflected the growing anxieties of the time. He was a hit, and he quickly became one of the publisher's flagship characters, eventually getting his own solo title, Batman number 1, just a year later. But here's the tragic part of the story. For decades, Bob Kane was credited as the sole creator of Batman. He had negotiated a contract that gave him a mandatory byline on every Batman story. Bill Finger, the man who designed the costume, created the backstory, named Bruce Wayne, and even co-created villains like the Joker, Catwoman, and the Penguin, received no credit. He lived and died in relative obscurity, working as a ghostwriter for Kane and other comic book creators. It wasn't until years after Finger's death that the truth began to surface. Thanks to the efforts of fans, historians, and writers like Mark Tyler Nobleman, they pieced together the evidence, conducted interviews, and fought to give Finger the recognition he deserved. Finally, in 2015, DC Comics officially began crediting Bill Finger as the co-creator of Batman in their comics, TV shows, and films. So when you think about Batman's debut, remember how close it came to being a failure. If not for Bill Finger's creative genius, we might have gotten a blonde hero in a red suit who faded into obscurity. Batman's creation wasn't a single stroke of genius. It was a desperate, last-minute collaboration that miraculously worked. It's a story of incredible luck, creative synergy, and a long-overdue correction of history. The Dark Knight didn't just rise in Gotham. He rose from the ashes of a near-disastrous first draft, all thanks to an unsung hero who saw a better way. What do you guys think? Were you surprised to learn about Batman's original design? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I love reading what you have to say. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into comic book history, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.